with a need to bleed you when the light goes green. Best believe I'm in the zone to be. From a yin to my yang to Z. Put a grin on my chin when you come to me, cause I'll win, I'm a one of a kind, and I'll bring death to the place you're about to be. Another river of blood running under my feet. Forged in the fire lit long ago. Stand next to me, you'll never stand alone. I'm last to leave, but the first to go. Lord, make me dead before you make me whole. I feed on the fear of the devil inside of the enemy faces in my sight. Aim with a hand, shoot with a mind, kill with a heart like Arctic ice.
I am a soldier and I'm marching on.
I am a soldier and I'm marching on.
I am a warrior, this is my song.
I am a warrior and this is my song. I'm basking the glow of the rising war. Lay waste to the ground of an enemy shore. Wade through the blood spilled on the floor. And if another one stands, I'll kill some more. Bullet in the breach and a fire in me, like a cigarette thrown to gasoline. If death don't bring you fear, I swear you'll fear these marching feet. Come to the nightmare, come to me. Deep down in the dark where the devil be. In the mall where the jaws and the razor teeth, where the brimstone burns and the angel weeps. Crawl to the gods of across your path, and my silhouette hangs like a body bag. Hope is a moment now long past. The shadow of death is the one I cast. I am a soldier and I'm marching on. I am a warrior and this is my song. My eyes are steel and my gaze is long. I am a warrior and this is my song.
We're not just going to shoot the bastard. We're going to cut out their living guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks. We're going to murder those lousy bastards by the bushel.
Now I live lean and I mean to inflict the grief, and the least of me is still out of your reach. The killing machine's gonna do the deed until the river runs dry and my last breath leaves. Chin in the air with a head held high, I'll stand in the path of the enemy line. Feel no fear, know my pride. For God and country I'll enjoy life. I am a soldier and I'm marching on. I am a warrior and this is my song. My eyes are steel and my gaze is long. I am a warrior and this is my song.
All right, now you sons of bitches, you know how I feel.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Steel City Resistance. I'm Hutch Bailey Jr., deep down in the bunker in my Smith & Wesson studio in the city of Pittsburgh. And every now and then, it's time to where you reflect and say, I knew that before. And luckily, we keep an archive here in the studio. And what I'm going to bring you tonight is from July 2015. This is just after President Trump, then candidate for the Republican nomination, Trump, said his thing about McCain and being a prisoner of war and all the hullabaloo that raised in his first, their first attempt to bring him down. This is an expose of John McCain. The reason that I did this is twofold. On the Wayne Dupree program, I went on a rant and I had emails thanking me from people that never heard about that side of John McCain. That's one reason I did it. The other reason is I feel that we're about ready to go down the road that we always go down. We lie to ourselves and our news media lie to us, and we rewrite history, and it's not fair and it should not happen. It happened when the evil, scum-sucking Ted Kennedy died, and they lionized him. It happened when Nelson Mandela died, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow on Cold War Radio. It happened when Ronald Reagan died, and phony Republicans and Democrats came out and pretended that they loved him, when they did everything in their power to do the same thing that they're trying to do to our president tonight. You're not going to recognize a voice on here. It's my former co-host, Mr. J. Like I said, this is from July 2015. Sit back, relax, and you'll know that I never changed in my opinion of John McCain as soon as I found out the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Steel City Resistance 233. Enjoy.
I thought we were the protectors of truth. Democrats, Republicans, you all lie. We, a small band of survivors, are on our way to the Steel City to find the resistance. Join us.
Welcome to the Steel City Resistance with
Mr. J from the Southern Command
and the ironclad voice of Pittsburgh, Hutch Jr., laying down verbal C4 to blow away the lies and the political tomfoolery. Your papers have been cleared. Welcome to the Steel City Resistance.
1900 hours, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Steel City Resistance here on our home base, WAAR Radio. We are America Radio, the #1 political talk radio station on Live 365. Outro music is provided by Dano at danosongs.com. The chat room is up at steelcityresistance.blogspot.com. Please follow us on Spreaker and subscribe to iTunes. Let's activate the Southern Command and welcome Mr. J to the program from outside Orlando. Good evening, Mr. J.
Good evening, Hutch. The state-of-the-art Southern Command Climate Control Studios are armed and activated this evening.
That's the way we like them. Please like the Facebook page, facebook.com/Steel City Resistance. The call-in line tonight, 412-567-1460. And the website is steelcityresistance.blogspot.com. And if you can get the donate button on that website and send us flying.
Absolutely, because this thing is getting interesting. And I got to tell you, I'm really disappointed at what some of the candidates have done here lately. And we really got to get there and ask them some questions and get some clarifications and at least try to get these guys back on a plausible message.
Yeah, they're really they're getting sidetracked. They're playing the media game. The media's playing them like Play-Doh. It's really something. This weekend, Donald Trump set off a fake powder keg pretty much. He said a couple, I don't know, I don't even want to call them unsavory things. I've even joked about it myself. But he talked about McCain and how he likes people that didn't get captured. And, I mean, it might have been a little distasteful, but, you know, Mr. J, I tell you, when I'm looking around and I'm looking at all these learned people, and I understand John McCain's service record and his stature and whatnot, it really rubbed me the wrong way today, listening to everybody just putting John McCain, an admiral's son, on a pedestal next to George S. Patton and Douglas MacArthur, who was another guy that went astray, so let's not use him. But Omar Bradley and George Marshall, these people that really truly were monumental leaders. And let's not even talk about heroes on the battlefield. But we're going to get into that in a little bit in depth. We're going to give you the real story on John McCain that's never been told in the mainstream media. And Britt Hume, you ought to be goddamn ashamed of yourself. You really should. I was talking to Mr. J before the program, and all the effort that I personally put into trying to get John McCain elected because you, Britt Hume, and the rest of your cohorts never reported the truth on this guy. It's so easy to find. The truth is so easy to find. We're going to bring it to you from Washington. Some of the things that happened that should have been talked about and weren't. It's just a crime, Mr. J, and it's really under my skin.
Yeah, well, we know that the legacy media doesn't like to really do their job like vetting, which is very important. But I think Trump stumbled over his words a little bit, but he made the clarifications. He pulled it right on out of there. And I think Trump is going to handle this just fine. I think his key is he's kind of like the liberals. I mean, when he starts talking, he keeps talking, and he doesn't stop talking, and nobody else can get a word in edgewise. And so it just breezes right on past him. And you hear all these pundits on TV and the establishment and these others saying that, oh, this guy's not even a viable candidate. Well, you sure are spending a lot of tension on this guy right now, aren't you? These guys are really nervous, and something that really, really disappointed me was what Rick Perry did in Texas there. I looked at his Facebook page. He posted something that one of these petitions that he wants you to sign and tell Trump that John McCain and all POWs are American war heroes. Just leave your email address and your zip code so that he can spam your inbox. He didn't tell you he was going to do that, but I'm telling you that's what he's going to do. And then he set up another thing where he said, Donald Trump should immediately quit the campaign and not run for president. And I'm looking at this thing, and he's got 9,000 likes on it, which, a lot of people just hit the like button just for the hell of it. So, but I looked at the comments.
That's not very many. But, the other thing he said was that he's not qualified to be commander-in-chief because Rick Perry flew an aircraft. He is qualified, but nobody else is. That's the thing. It's just... It was disrespectful, and I understand Rick Perry's place. He's got about 2% or something like that, and I like the guy. I liked him up until that point. But to follow the people that jump on the bandwagon, I don't trust a whole lot of people that do that, and almost all of our candidates did it.
They did, and this post had 10,000 comments. And, first of all, Rick Perry has a pretty decent record he can run on without diving into this. This shows how desperate his campaign is to try to get some traction. And if he thinks that he's going to, pick off some of these Trump supporters now, that's not going to happen. He just killed that deal. But these 10,000 comments, and I didn't look at all 10,000 of them because the time constraints, but almost exclusively they were very critical of what Kerry said. And I got 5 of them here. One of them, our friend Alicia, writes, what about John McCain's reprehensible remarks, obviously referring to the people that came to his event, calling them crazies, John McCain did. And then Zach Caudill, come on, Perry, just say you don't agree with his comments and move on. Don't demand his resignation from the presidential race. You sound like a whiny liberal Democrat. Derek Briscoe says, are you scared, Perry? But Donald is right. Trump 2016. Kenneth Bruce Evers says, Rick Perry should wake up. I like Perry, but all the old school GOP guys better wake up and see that those who voted them into office are sick of political correctness. Trump speaks his mind. It's refreshing. And finally, this one is the most brutal, especially for somebody from Texas. Daniel Mitchell, I was proud to call you my governor, but you are starting to sound more like John Boehner than Rick Perry, and Donald Trump sounds more like a Texan than Rick Perry. Ouch, that's gotta hurt.
That does have to sting. Did you notice what the swing was? Was it probably more standing up for McCain than defending Trump?
It was more standing up for Trump. I mean, they were
good,
and Rick got a lot of heat on this. I'm surprised he still let the comments up on that post. But it's and Michael Reagan. I mean, that guy. He's on this anti-Trump thing now too, and it's really nauseating, and it's hard to have respect. And Buck Sexton's doing the same thing, and he put one post out there, and then his followers were starting to get critical of him. So he revised it a little bit, toned it down a little bit. It's still the same message. I think these guys. I think this just proves that they fear Donald Trump. He's a legitimate candidate. They know he is, and they're trying to convince us that he's not. And that's not to say I'm voting for Donald Trump, but he is what he is.
Well, I'm not saying that either. I'm not saying that I'm not either, though. But I'll tell you what I want to see is I want to see Brit Hume in a couple of days when this didn't affect Trump at all. When it didn't mess with his numbers or anything, and that's coming. I would imagine, because it's just a ridiculous situation. And after you listen to this program tonight, we've got a really explosive program for you this evening, if you didn't know any of this, because the media certainly didn't report it, but we'll get to that when we get to it. It's Ramadan and Eid. So what happens is in Chattanooga, an Islamist warrior executes 5 United States military personnel from the Department of the Navy, 4 Marines and a sailor. Cop gets hurt. And what does New York City do? They take their second tallest building and they light it green to honor the religion that inspired the murder of 5 Americans just the day before. The city can't do this with the tallest building, well, because it's not there anymore. But anyway, it's something that I couldn't believe it. It's just like, the president sent out a message of love and everything for Ramadan right after this happened. I mean, there's nobody's paying attention to this at all, man. It's unbelievable.
It is. It's like the people of New York forgot what happened. They forgot who did it. And they forgot why they did it. It's nauseating, and I got to tell you, how could they forget this? It doesn't make any sense. And they keep telling us, that this is the religion of peace. I mean, thousands of people lost their lives that one day in New York City, and they're going to make the top of that Empire State Building green for Ramadan? Ridiculous.
You used to think New Yorkers had some fight in them, but they just seem to lay down with this de Blasio guy. And speaking of the religion of peace, this year's Ramadan Bombathon was the most lopsided ever. Nearly 3,000 people were shot, beheaded, blown up, drowned, burned, or hacked to death in the name of Islam, while religions not nicknamed the religion of peace failed to inspire a single fatality. Ladies and gentlemen, your weekly jihad report for July 11th to July 17th. 76 jihad attacks, 17 Allahu Akbars, 675 dead bodies, 885 critically injured. The Ramadan Bombathon 2015 scorecard, because if you think all religions are the same, you aren't paying attention. 314 terror attacks in the name of the religion of peace, 0 in the name of any other religion, and 0 by way of anti-Muslim hate crime. 63 suicide bombings in the name of the religion of peace, 0 in the name of any other religion, and 0 by way of anti-Muslim hate crime. 2,988 dead bodies in the name of the religion of peace, 0 in the name of any other religion, and 0 by way of anti-Muslim hate crime. 3,696 wounded in the name of the religion of peace, 0 in the name of any other religion, and 0 by way of anti-Muslim hate crime. Islam's latest contributions to peace: Muhammad is Allah's apostle. Those who follow him are harsh to the unbelievers, but merciful to one another. Quran 48:29. On the 17th, in Tifran, Algeria, 11 security personnel are ambushed and murdered by Al-Qaeda. On the same day in Quetta, Pakistan, a suicide bomber detonates at a woman's university, killing a guard. The same day in Sholgar, Afghanistan, strict Islamic law activists set off a bomb outside a rival mosque that kills 3 worshippers leaving after prayer. Boy, the 17th was a tough day. Khan Bani Saad, Iraq. Children are among over 100 innocents cut down by Mujahid bombers while celebrating Ramadan. Damafaru, Nigeria. A 10-year-old girl and elderly woman are strapped with suicide vests and sent in to a rival prayer ground. And finally, on the 16th, Chattanooga, United States, a devout Muslim stages a suicide attack on a recruiting center at a strip mall and a naval center, which leaves 5 dead. The religion of peace, ladies and gentlemen, one body at a time. Wow. Business is booming in the holiday spirit, Mr. J.
It absolutely is, and we've got a president that tells us that this religion is good, it's peaceful, it's loving. I mean, you got to wonder. You look at a country like Iran, looking at the pictures of the Empire State Building green. I mean, they're going, we're winning. We're going to take this place.
They are winning. It's true. And it's sickening. And it's our liberals and actually the Muslim Brotherhood that has infiltrated our government. And it's there, and we're gonna burn it out of there at some point. I'm not giving this up. But anyway, let's get to our main subject for the day. And let's talk about John McCain, the war hero. Now, this is by Sidney Schonberg. And it's so long, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to dedicate the majority of the show to this. But it's so long that I had to put it in the research room. So if you go to steelcityresistance.blogspot.com, go into the research room, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see it's called McCain and the POW cover-up. It's about 100 pages long, and it's in there. You can read it in its entirety. Also, I'm going to play a clip in a couple minutes, and the clip is audio from a video that is posted at Cold War Radio Video Classroom on steelcityresistance.blogspot.com. So you can view the whole video. It's from the 80s, early 90s, when this all occurred. And this is why I got so upset with the Brit Hume types and all these politicians that are so smart that seem to have forgotten all about what happened back then. And I'll just give you a quick overview, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes. But there was a movement right shortly after the Vietnam War. Those of you my age and older will remember where there was a movement to really get out there and try to find MIAs and find POWs that we left behind. There was documentation of leaving POWs behind in Korea and in Vietnam, and there was a huge effort by some hawks in the government to keep all these secrets and keep the truth from coming out. And they did some just hideous things. And the guy in charge of that, right at the helm, was John McCain. So let's get into this. The war hero candidate buried information about POWs left behind in Vietnam. Now, this story is from 2010. It's from when McCain was running for president. 18 months ago, TAC publisher Ron Unz discovered an astonishing account of the role the 2008 Republican presidential nominee John McCain had played in suppressing information about what happened to American soldiers missing in action in Vietnam. And then his exclusive story begins here. John McCain, who has risen to political prominence on his image as a Vietnam POW war hero, has inexplicably worked very hard to hide from the public stunning information about American prisoners of Vietnam, who, unlike him, didn't return home. Throughout his Senate career, McCain has quietly sponsored and pushed into federal law a set of prohibitions that keep the most revealing information about these men buried as classified documents. Thus, the war hero, who people would logically imagine as a determined crusader for the interests of POWs and their families, became instead the strange champion of hiding the evidence and closing the books. Almost as striking is the manner in which the mainstream press has shielded from reporting the POW story and McCain's role in it. Even at Brit Hume, I'm thinking of you right now, even as the Republican Party has made McCain's military service the focus of his presidential campaign, and also today the focus of their attacks on Donald Trump, reporters who had covered the Vietnam War turned their heads and walked in other directions. McCain doesn't talk about the missing men, and the press never asks him about them.
The sum of the secrets McCain has sought to hide is not small. There exists a telling mass of official documents, radio intercepts, witness depositions, satellite photos of rescue symbols that pilots were trained to use, electronic messages from the ground containing the individual code numbers given to airmen, a rescue mission by a special forces unit that was aborted twice by Washington, and even sworn testimony by 2 defense secretaries that men were left behind. This imposing body of evidence suggests that a large number, the documents indicate probably hundreds, of the U.S. prisoners held by Vietnam were not returned when the peace treaty was signed in January 1973, and Hanoi released 591 men, among them Navy combat pilot John S. McCain. Massive evidence. The Pentagon had been withholding significant information from POW families for years. What's more, the Pentagon's POW MIA operation had been publicly shamed by internal whistleblowers and POW families for holding back documents as part of a policy of debunking POW intelligence, even when the information was obviously credible. The pressure from the families and the Vietnam veterans finally forced the creation in late 1991 of a Senate Select Committee on POW MIA affairs. The chairman was John Kerry. McCain, as a former POW, was its most pivotal member. In the end, the committee became a part of the debunking machine, and this is where it gets really ugly.
It does. One of the sharpest critics of the Pentagon's performance was an insider, Air Force Lieutenant General Eugene Tai, who headed the DIA during the 1970s. He openly challenged the Pentagon's position that no live prisoners existed, saying that the evidence proved otherwise. McCain was a bitter opponent of Tai, who was eventually pushed into retirement. That's the way this guy does things. Included in the evidence that McCain and his government allies suppressed or sought to discredit is a transcript of a senior North Vietnamese general's briefing of the Hanoi Politburo, discovered in Soviet archives by an American scholar in 1993. The briefing took place only 4 months before the 1973 peace accords. The general, Tran Von Quang, told the Politburo members that Hanoi was holding 1,205 American prisoners, but would keep many of them at war's end as leverage to ensure getting war reparations from Washington. Throughout the Paris negotiations, the North Vietnamese tied the prisoner issue tightly to the issue of reparations. They were adamant in refusing to deal with them separately. Finally, in a February 2nd, 1973, formal letter to Hanoi's premier, Pham Van Dong, Nixon pledged $3.25 billion in post-war reconstruction aid without any political conditions. But he also attached to the letter a codicil that said the aid would be implemented by each party in accordance with its own constitutional provisions. That meant Congress would have to approve the appropriation, and Nixon and Kissinger knew well that Congress was in no mood to do so. The North Vietnamese, whether or not they immediately understood the double talk in the letter, remained skeptical about the reparations promise being honored, and it never was. Hanoi, thus, appears to have held back prisoners, just as it had done when the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 and withdrew their forces from Vietnam. In that case, France paid ransoms for the prisoners and brought them home. In a private briefing in 1992, high-level CIA officials told me that as the years passed and the ransom never came, it became more and more difficult for either government to admit that it knew from the start about the unacknowledged prisoners. Those prisoners had not only become useless as bargaining chips, but also posed a risk to Hanoi's desire to be accepted into the international community. The CIA officials said their intelligence indicated strongly that the remaining men, those who had not died from illness, hard labor, or torture, were eventually executed. God rest their souls.
Yeah, my own research detailed below has convinced me that it is not likely that more than a few, if any, are alive in captivity today. That CIA briefing at the agency's Langley, Virginia headquarters was conducted off the record, but because the evidence from my own reporting since then has brought me to some conclusions, I felt that it was no longer any point in not writing about the meeting. For many reasons, including the absence of a political constituency for the missing men other than their families and some veterans groups, very few Americans are aware of the POW story and McCain's role in keeping it out of the public view and denying the existence of abandoned POWs. That is because McCain has hardly been alone in this campaign to hide the scandal. The Arizona senator, now the Republican candidate for president, has actually been following the lead of every White House since Richard Nixon's, and thus every CIA director, Pentagon chief, and national security advisor, not to mention Dick Cheney, who was George H.W. Bush's defense secretary. Their biggest accomplice has been an indolent press, particularly in Washington.
Brett Hume, I'm thinking of you again, buddy. Let's talk about McCain's role. An early and critical McCain secrecy move involved 1990 legislation that started in the House of Representatives. A brief and simple document, it was called the Truth Bill, and would have compelled complete transparency about prisoners and missing men. Its core sentence reads, "The heads of each department or agency which holds or receives any records and information, including live sighting reports, which have been correlated or possibly correlated to the United States personnel listed as prisoner of war or missing in action from World War II, the Korean conflict, and the Vietnam conflict, shall make available to the public all such records held or received by that department or agency." It sounds pretty cut and dried, something everyone would vote for. Bitterly opposed by the Pentagon and thus McCain, the bill went nowhere. Reintroduced the following year, it again disappeared. But a few months later, a new measure, known as the McCain Bill, suddenly appeared. By creating a bureaucratic maze from which only a fraction of the documents could emerge, only records that revealed no POW secrets, it turned the Truth Bill on its head. The McCain Bill became law in 1991 and remains so today. So crushing to transparency are its provisions that it actually spells out for the Pentagon and other agencies several rationales, scenarios, and justifications for not releasing any information at all, even about prisoners discovered alive in captivity. Later that year, the Senate Select Committee was created, where Kerry and McCain ultimately worked together to bury evidence. He sounds like a true military hero, doesn't he? Doesn't he, ladies and gentlemen? He sounds just like George S. Patton. He's out there for the troops, buddy. People rotted in those jungle camps because of this guy. I mean, what did we say at the beginning? They had the codes and everything. They knew who these people were, by name, some of them.
Oh, absolutely. I believe they know that there was people left behind, and they knew that they were alive. And this information, thanks to McCain and Kerry, has not been getting out. McCain was also instrumental in amending the Missing Service Personnel Act, which had been strengthened in 1995 by POW advocates to include criminal penalties, saying any government official who knowingly or willfully withholds from the file of a missing person any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts and status of a missing person shall be fined as provided in Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. A year later, in a closed House Senate conference on an unrelated military bill, McCain, at the behest of the Pentagon, attached a crippling amendment to the act, stripping out its only enforcement teeth, the criminal penalties, and reducing the obligations of commanders in the field to speedily search for missing men and to report the incidents to the Pentagon. About the relaxation of the POW-MIA obligations on commanders in the field, a public McCain memo said, "This transfers the bureaucracy involved out of the battlefield to Washington." He wrote that the original legislation left intact would accomplish nothing but create new jobs for lawyers and turn military commanders into clerks. McCain urged that keeping the criminal penalties would have made it impossible for the Pentagon to find staffers willing to work on the POW-MIA matters. That's an odd argument to make. Were staffers only willing to work if they were allowed to conceal POW records? By eviscerating the law, McCain gave his stamp of approval to the government policy of debunking the existence of live POWs. That doesn't sound very hero-esque to me, Hutch.
No, and you know the way he treats people, too. McCain has insisted again and again that all the evidence, documents, witnesses, satellite photos, 2 Pentagon chiefs' sworn statements, aborted rescue missions, ransom offers apparently scorned, has been woven together by unscrupulous deceivers to create an insidious and unpatriotic myth. He calls it the bizarre rantings of the MIA lobbyist. He has regularly vilified those who keep trying to pry out classified documents as hoaxers, charlatans, conspiracy theorists, and dime store Rambos. Some of McCain's fellow captives at Ho Lo Prison in Hanoi didn't share his views about prisoners left behind. Before he died of leukemia in 1999, retired Colonel Ted Guy, a highly admired POW and one of the most dogged resistors in the camps, wrote an angry open letter to the senator in an MIA newsletter, a response to McCain's stream of insults hurled at MIA activists. Guy wrote, "John, does the insults, include Senator Bob Smith, a New Hampshire Republican and activist on POW issues, and other concerned elected officials? Does this include the families of the missing, where there is overwhelming evidence that their loved ones were last known alive? Does this include some of your fellow POWs?" Now, I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, back in these, especially if you're a little younger, back in these days, in the late 80s and the 90s, there were numerous sightings of white people and black people in Vietnam. I mean, there was just long, drawn-out stories, and I used to think that they were crazy, but I'm starting to think that they were real now. Now, I want to, let me cover one more thing, and then I want you to listen to this tape. Now, listen to this. In his best-selling, this is the part that ticks me off the most. In his best-selling 1999 autobiography, Faith of My Fathers, McCain says he felt bad throughout his captivity because he knew he was being treated more leniently than his fellow POWs, owing to his high-ranking father and thus his propaganda value. Other prisoners at Ho Lo say his captors considered him a prize catch and called him the Crown Prince, something McCain acknowledges in the book. Also in the memoir, McCain expresses guilt at having broken under torture and giving the confession. I felt fatherless. I felt faithless and couldn't control my despair, he writes, revealing that he made 2 feeble attempts at suicide. In later years, he said he tried to hang himself with his shirt and guards intervened. Tellingly, he says he lived in dread that his father would find out about the confession. I still wince, he writes, when I recall wondering if my father had heard of my disgrace. And he did. But I want you to listen now. And this is an audio excerpt of a video that is in the Cold War video classroom, but you're going to hear a few people in here. You're going to hear Senator Bob Smith, senator from New Hampshire, Lynn O'Shea, director of research, National Alliance of Families, Tracy Usry, an investigator for the committee, and B1 Bob Dornan, a representative from California at the time. So I just wanted you to hear this in their words, so there's no mistake as to the authenticity of this. But let's listen. This is about 4 minutes long. The video is about 10 minutes long, I think. But just listen to this. It's damning.
I'll tell you, what's not said on the television and will not be said on the television is how much Vietnam veterans and POWs hate John McCain.
The Senate felt compelled to set up the Select Committee, and that it took them 9 months to set up the committee, mainly because of the opposition of Senator McCain, who was bitterly opposed to any attempt to find the POWs, which is remarkable, seeing that he was a POW himself.
No instance would he ever give in and say there were POWs left behind. And my first question is, how would he know or not know? So just that which is reasonable he never exhibited, and I don't know why. Maybe it's a guilt complex. Maybe he promised the Vietnamese something. Okay. And I don't know what it is. And maybe he actually believes that. That would be the saddest of all.
He probably did more harm to the idea of trying to get the truth out than any other single person through the efforts he did to block the release of classified intelligence dealing with the POW-MIA problem.
McCain stepped in and, in effect, made it harder to get documentation. That certainly hurt us because we had hoped for a massive release of documentation.
Many documents were held back for no reason, and our goal on the committee was to just dump this stuff, to declassify it, literally, to the public. But of course, they withheld information from the committee. The U.S. government held all kinds of information from the committee, withheld information from the committee. I know that for a fact.
He didn't want nobody to check his background, because a lot of POWs that were with him in the camp said he was a collaborator of the enemy. And he didn't want nobody looking into his background in the camp, what went on in that camp. That stuff is still classified, so nobody can see it. And he just had it classified forever, so nobody will ever look at it.
Even POWs we knew who wanted to see their own debriefings were not permitted because of the McCain regulation.
But where did McCain get compliments for doing this? The bureaucrats at the Pentagon. Right. Because it put a workload on them. It put a workload on them for missing in action people. And did we need that bill to handle a Scott Spiker case? Oh, you bet we did.
And also what it did, and this is what he really opposed, and if you remember the contentiousness we got into him in his office, was that it would hold the bureaucrats accountable by penalty of law.
That's right.
If they lied or if they withheld information.
That's right.
And he fought tooth and nail to protect those bureaucrats.
Yes.
Because they were protecting him.
Could never understand that. Why would we, if someone was guilty of withholding information that would help us to solve the mystery of what happened to an MIA and did it deliberately, why would we not want to prosecute that person? So I could never understand it. I thought the language was written. I know Bob Dornan had a hand in it. I thought the language was written very well. I supported it, fought for it hard in the U.S. Senate and mostly on the Armed Services Committee where we debated it. But it was watered down to basically where it was almost worthless.
Pretty much unanimous vote.
401-0 on the House, with every single Republican who is serving sponsoring it, and about a third of the Democrats.
On the Senate side, we had one person standing in the way of getting in positions that would have been very tough on government bureaucrats who didn't tell the truth, and that one person was Senator John McCain.
John McCain and John Kerry both were not pursuing this with the same approach that I was.
He insisted that no committee be set up unless he was chairman. Obviously, his intent was to kill everything.
So there's no way that you can call these people heroes. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. You heard it. I mean, 400 and some to nothing in the House, and John McCain holding it up in the Senate. To get information to family members and to groups that were trying to find these MIAs. There's some lethal stuff in those documents, and they need to come out. I mean, they need to come out now. I mean, it's almost too late now. What is he, in his 70s already?
Yeah, he's up there. But I mean, when you see the accounts of some of the people that were in the POW camp, I mean, usually the military are pretty tight-knit, and they only call out shadiness when they see it. That's rare, but I think it just lends to the credibility of this, and obviously, the government, along with John McCain, wants this covered up. And I think enough time has gone past. This information should be released. And I don't know what could be so classified in there that it can't be released now. I mean,
I don't see how he gets so much power when the entire House of Representatives votes for it, and Britt Hume doesn't feel it's necessary to report that. I mean, I just think that's stunning. That's just, did he have a pistol? How did this happen? I mean, let's talk about the author a little bit, about his pursuit of the story. He says, I covered the war in Cambodia and Vietnam, but came to the POW information only slowly afterward, when military officers I knew from that conflict began coming to me with maps and POW sightings and depositions by Vietnamese witnesses. I was then city editor of the New York Times, no longer involved in foreign or national stories, so I took the data to the appropriate desks and suggested it was material worth pursuing. There were no takers. Some years later, in 1991, when I was an op-ed columnist at Newsday, the aforementioned Special Senate Committee was formed to probe the POW issue. I saw this as an opening and immersed myself in the reporting. At Newsday, I wrote 36 columns over a 2-year period, as well as a 4-part series on a trip I took to North Vietnam to report on what happened to one missing pilot who was shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and captured when he parachuted down. After Newsday, I wrote thousands more words on the subject for other outlets. Some of the pieces were about McCain's key role. Though I wrote on many subjects for Life, Vanity Fair, and Washington Monthly, my POW articles appeared in Penthouse, The Village Voice, and APBnews.com. Mainstream publications just weren't interested. Their disinterest was part of what motivated me, and I became one of a very short list of journalists who considered the story important.
Serving in the Army in Germany during the Cold War and witnessing combat firsthand as a reporter in India, Indochina, led me to have great respect for those who fought for the country. To my mind, we dishonored U.S. troops when our government failed to bring them home from Vietnam after the 591 others were released, and then claimed they didn't exist. And politicians dishonor themselves when they pay lip service to the bravery and sacrifice of soldiers, only to leave untold numbers behind, rationalizing to themselves that it's merely one of the unfortunate costs of war. John McCain, now campaigning for the White House as a war hero, a maverick, a straight shooter, owes the voters some explanations. The press were long ago wooed and won by McCain's seemingly openness, Lone Ranger pose, and self-deprecating humor, which may partly explain their ignoring his record on POWs. In the numerous lengthy McCain profiles that have appeared of late in papers like the New York Times and Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, I may have missed a clause or a sentence along the way, but I have found not a single mention of his role in burying information about POWs. Television, radio news programs have been similarly silent. Reporters simply never ask him about it. They didn't when he ran unsuccessfully for the Republican nomination in 2000. They haven't now, despite the fact we're in the midst of another war, a war he supports and one that has echoes of Vietnam. The only explanation McCain has ever offered for his leadership on legislation that seals POW files is that he believes that the release of such information would only stir up fresh grief for the families of those who were never accounted for in Vietnam. Of the scores of POW families I've met over the years, only a few have said they want the books closed without knowing what happened to their men. All the rest say that it's not knowing exactly what gives them grief. And I agree with that. I think when it says here, when they say that the release of such information only stirs up fresh grief, it's only going to stir up grief for the government. That's who's going to get the grief, because they are well aware of what went on there and what they did and their lack of effort. They're the ones covering this up to cover their asses.
You're absolutely right. Now, how did this Senate committee perpetuate the debunking? In its early months, the Senate Select Committee on POW-MIA Affairs gave the appearance of being committed to finding out the truth about the MIAs. As time went on, however, it became clear that they were cooperating in every way with the Pentagon and CIA, who often seemed to be calling the shots, even setting the agendas for certain key hearings. Both agencies held back the most important POW files. Dick Cheney was the Pentagon chief then. Robert Gates, now the Pentagon chief, was the CIA director. Further, the committee failed to question any living president. Reagan declined to answer questions. The committee didn't contest his refusal. Nixon was given a pass. George H.W. Bush, the sitting president, whose prints were all over this issue from his days as CIA chief in the 70s, was never even approached. Troubled by these signs, several committee staffers began asking why the agencies they should be probing had been turned into committee partners and decision makers. Memos to that effect were circulated. The staff made the following finding using intelligence reports marked credible that covered POW sightings through 1989. There can be no doubt that POWs were alive as late as 1989. That finding was never released. Eventually, much of the staff was in rebellion. The internecine struggle continued right up to the committee's last official act, the issuance of its final report. The executive summary, which comprised the first 43 pages, was essentially a whitewash, saying that only a small number of POWs could have been left behind in 1973, and that there was little likelihood that any prisoners could still be alive. The Washington Press Corps, judging from its coverage, seems to have read only this airbrushed summary, which had been closely controlled. But the rest of the 1,200-page report on POW MIAs was quite different. Sprinkled throughout are pieces of hard evidence that directly contradict the summary's conclusions. The documentation established that a significant number of prisoners were left behind, and that top government officials knew this from the start. John McCain. These candid findings were inserted by committee staffers who had unearthed the evidence and were determined not to allow the truth to be sugar-coated. If the Washington Press Corps did actually read the body of the report, Britt Hume, and then failed to report its contents, that would be a scandal of its own. The press would then have knowingly ignored the steady stream of findings, Chris Wallace, in the body of the report that refuted the summary and indicated that the number of abandoned men was not small but considerable, Rick Perry. The report gave no figures, but estimates from various branches of the intelligence community ranged up to 600. The lowest estimate was 150. But if you listen at the beginning of this show, when we talked about the Politburo report, he said they had 1,200 and only 591 returned.
Absolutely, and I remember back in the early to mid 80s when these reports came out of these possible POWs being sightings being reported in Vietnam and other areas, and it kind of really got the POW movement. I remember it just kind of breathed some new life in it. I remember seeing all the POW MIA flags flying. So this is very interesting. What I didn't know until today, John McCain's extent into covering this up. This is astonishing. This is not heroics here. I mean, there's a whole summary here, highlights of the report that undermine the benign conclusions of the executive summary. Pages 207 to 209. These 3 pages contain revelations of what appear to be either massive intelligence failures or bad intentions or both. The report says that until the committee brought up the subject in 1992, no branch of the intelligence community that dealt with analysis of satellite and lower altitude photos have ever been informed of specific distress signals U.S. personnel were trained to use in the Vietnam War, nor had they ever been tasked to look for any such signals at all from possible prisoners on the ground. The committee decided, however, not to seek a review of old photography, saying it would cost the expenditure of large amounts of manpower and money with no expectation of success. It might as well have been turned up lots of distress signal numbers that nobody in the government was looking for from 1973 to 1991 when the committee opened up shop. That would have made it impossible for the committee to write the executive summary it seemed determined to write. The failures gets worse. The committee also discovered that the DIA, which kept the list of the authenticator numbers for pilots and other personnel, could not locate the list of these codes for Army, Navy, and Marine pilots. They lost or destroyed the records. The Air Force list was the only one intact, as it had been previously preserved by different intelligence branch.
Doesn't that sound like Lerner and her emails crashing, her hard drives crashing? Come on. The report concluded, in theory, therefore, if a POW still living in captivity today were to attempt to communicate by ground signal, smuggling out a note, or by whatever means possible, and he used his personal authenticator number to confirm his identity, the U.S. government would be unable to provide such confirmation. If his number happened to be among those numbers DIA cannot locate. It's worth remembering that throughout the period when this intelligence disaster occurred, from the moment the treaty was signed in 73 until 1991, the White House told the public that it had given the search for POWs and POW information the highest national priority. And on page 13, even in the executive summary, the report acknowledges the existence of clear intelligence made known to government officials early on that important numbers of captured U.S. POWs were not on Hanoi's repatriation list. After Hanoi released its list, showing only 10 names from Laos, 9 military men and 1 civilian, President Nixon sent a message on February 2nd, 1973, to Hanoi's Prime Minister Pham Van Dong, saying U.S. records show there are 317 American military men unaccounted for in Laos, and it's inconceivable that only 10 of these men would be held prisoner in Laos. Nixon was right. It was inconceivable. Then why did the president, less than 2 months later, on March 29, 1973, announce on national television that all of our American POWs are on their way home? On April 13, 1973, just after all 591 men on Hanoi's official list had returned to American soil, the Pentagon got into step with the president and announced that there was no evidence of any further live prisoners in Indochina. And this is on page 248. What a bunch of scoundrels.
Absolutely. Page 91. A lengthy footnote provides more confirmation of the White House's knowledge of abandoned POWs. The footnote reads, in a telephone conversation with Select Committee Vice Chairman Bob Smith on December 29, 1992, Dr. Kissinger said that he had informed President Nixon during the 60-day period after the peace agreement was signed that the U.S. intelligence officials believed that the list of prisoners captured in Laos was incomplete. According to Dr. Kissinger, the president responded by directing that the exchange of prisoners on the list go forward, but added that a failure to account for the additional prisoners after Operation Homecoming would lead to a resumption of bombings. Dr. Kissinger said that the president was later unwilling to carry through on this threat. When Kissinger learned of the footnote while the final editing of the committee report was in progress, he and his lawyers lobbied fiercely through 2 Republican allies on the panel. One of them was John McCain, to get the footnote expunged. Their effort failed. The footnote stayed intact. Pages 85 to 86, the committee report quotes Kissinger from his memoirs, writing solely in reference to prisoners in Laos. We knew of at least 80 instances in which an American serviceman had been captured alive and subsequently disappeared. The evidence consisted of either voice communications from the ground in advance of the capture or photographs of names published by the communists. Yet none of these men on the list of the POWs handed over after the agreement. Then why did he swear under oath to the committee in 1992 that he had never had any information that specific? Named soldiers were captured alive and hadn't been returned by Vietnam?
Now, McCain's catch-22, none of this compelling evidence in the committee's full report dislodged McCain from his contention that the whole POW issue was a concoction by deluded purveyors of a conspiracy theory. But an honest review of the full report, combined with the other documentary evidence, tells the story of a frustrated and angry president and his national security advisor, furious at being thwarted at the peace table by a small, much less powerful country that refused to bow to Washington's terms. That president seems to have swallowed hard and accepted a treaty that left probably hundreds of Americans prisoners in Hanoi's hands to be used as bargaining chips for reparations. Maybe Nixon and Kissinger told themselves that they could get the prisoners home after some time had passed, but perhaps it proved too hard to undo a lie as big as this one. Washington said no prisoners were left behind, and Hanoi swore it had returned all of them. How could either side later admit it had lied? Time went by, and as neither side budged, telling the truth became even more difficult and remote. The public would realize that Washington knew of the abandoned men all along. The truth, after the men had been languishing in foul prison cells, could get people impeached or thrown in jail. Which brings us to today, when the Republican candidate for president is the contemporary politician most responsible for keeping the truth about this matter hidden. Yet he says he's the right man to be commander-in-chief, and his credibility in making this claim is largely based on his image as a POW hero. Well, John McCain, you're no hero, and you probably should be tried for treason, and anybody who thinks he's a hero is just lazy. Mr. J, we are out of time.
All right, this is a great in-depth look at this issue and John McCain himself. I guess you have to ask yourself what the definition of a hero is. If it's rather loose, maybe you could throw this guy in it. I do commend his service, but things that went on there and this POW issue, it just turns my stomach, and I don't like the guy today, right now. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Steel City Resistance. The show notes for this show are published at steelcityresistance.blogspot.com. You can find me at MRJAUSA at Facebook, Twitter, and Tea Party Community. See you tomorrow night for Cold War Radio here on War Radio at 8 p.m. I believe the Hidden Report with Angel Rodriguez is up next tonight, if I'm not mistaken, Hutch. I am mistaken.
It's political heat.
Political heat. My apologies, Dan.
9 o'clock. All right, thank you, Mr. J. We'll put the Southern Command back on reserve status. I'd like to know, ladies and gentlemen, send an email to scrtv@live.com if you like the format of a single topic like that. It's the first time we ever tried that. It was one of those stories we felt it was necessary. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being in the chat room. There's a problem with Cold War Radio's podcast. It should be up tomorrow. We'll work on that. I'm Hutch Bailey Jr. on Facebook, Bird's Eye View on Twitter. Thanks for letting us into your life for an hour, and God bless.